I think the first thing I have to say is that the cultural sector in Scotland, just like everybody else, finds itself staring at a blank sheet of paper at the moment. And on that blank sheet of paper, it's supposed to formulate a survival plan. Now, most futurologists have the benefit of precedent because most of them can look at another era or look at another crisis and they can cut and paste some lessons from them. But not this time, because this March, as it turned out, was very much our year zero. And however we decide to distribute tomorrow's soul food, the delivery mechanisms can never be quite the same ever again. Now, some of the people whose job it was to facilitate that delivery will find their experience and skill set is ill matched to the New World Order. And some of them are going to find themselves in a rather overcrowded, leaky boat with other creatives. Because every day in the last week or two, we've read of major cultural icons going under across every branch of the arts. The previously unsinkables have barely got their heads above water just now. Some creatives, of course, are being determinedly proactive and they're examining already what was functioning imperfectly, and they're trying to work out how the scale of this challenge can be bent towards fresh opportunity. And like James, I've been very interested in the thought processes of the playwright Peter Arnott, because in addition to what he said to the Culture Committee the other month, he's also penned, as James said, a longer essay which looks at current dilemmas. But what he's also done is plotted a kind of staged re-emergence. Now, Peter's focus naturally is the theatre, but much of what he says is opposite in more general terms, because every art form, every performance, every festival, which has been animated by that special relationship between audience and actor or author or musician, now wrestles essentially with the same conundrum, how the magic gets saved and how it gets recreated. Peter's analogy is that of an illness. He reckons that the period from March until now was an emergency, or is an emergency, and that's, I must admit, certainly how it feels. The critical phase, he says, will be from now until August, followed by a convalescence, and then a recovery from next spring till August 2021. And he wants to use the festival season in August 2021 as a kind of relaunch pad. I'm not going to recite any more of Peter's thoughts because they are very much his thoughts and his perspective. But, you know, he's got some broad brush themes which I think are immensely valuable to people like myself and to James and to Comrie, in fact, because all of us dwell in rural Scotland. And that means we've got myriad advantages, but also it means that all too often we've got a paucity of cultural treats. In Peter's vision, rural Scotland would not be on the periphery of the New World Order, but instead its beating heart. And I want to give you just a short quotation from what Peter wrote. He said, "I would suggest that if we once again prioritise a community-focused style of production appropriate to audiences in socially and geographically isolated circumstances, in health and prison settings, for example, in schools as well as village halls and community centres, we can become integral to the recuperation of these community assets and we can cement ourselves into the wider society." And he goes on, "We're already an economic asset and a social one. We should make the most of the potential for enhancing our presence. We would be going a long way towards asserting communitarian values as part of the recovery that we want to keep when the recovery is over." Now, it's not entirely self-interest which makes me applaud that sentiment of Peter's, because if we're forced to contemplate a future where the major venues may not all be sustainable, or audiences in the short term at least are too fearful to return to them, then small may become beautiful out of necessity. Here in Kilcreggan, in our Guy Live programme, our local village hall, and it houses touring theatre and music of every genre and an annual book festival, which this year will probably only happen virtually. But the guiding principle of everything we put on here is to seek out the very best and to persuade them to let rural audiences access it. Now, this, of course, has got two wonderful benefits. The first, self-evidently, is having top talent on our doorstep, but another, no less significant, I would argue, is growing new audiences. Our book festival feedback, for instance, suggests that a significant minority of those who come are prompted to come and hear authors of whom they may never have heard, but then who enjoy the experience, who love hearing them, and then they buy their books. Now, this is not to suggest for a moment that those who live and work and thrive in an urban environment, which I used to do, should be deprived of all the pleasures which may have been a major part of them deciding to live in a major town setting. top quality live theatre and music in a major theatre or concert hall is an absolute joy. And yet it may be, ladies and gentlemen, that in years to come, they access these plays and films and concerts in a slightly different form, just as most of us are having to do now. And some of the live element, as Peter suggests, may migrate to touring. I recognise, of course, that's no solution to the existential danger facing some of Scotland's most cherished major venues at the moment, those theatres and concert halls and festivals which provide the spiritual nourishment of experiencing the arts in a collective way, sharing the joy of them and the stimulation of the blethering and the debates that follow them. A dispiriting report the other day calculated that no fewer than 7,000 Scottish creative jobs are on the line right now. And until and unless emergency resources are found to keep hope alive, some of them will not come back. I confess readily to being underwhelmed by the UK Culture Secretary's 5-step plan to recovery, unveiled for major venues in London and elsewhere, whose possible closures have led to widespread disbelief. I mean, the Royal Exchange in Manchester, the Albert Hall in London. And nearer home, as we know, there are major venues wondering if their doors are ever going to open again, which made the £10 million targeted fund announced last Friday all the more welcome. But in England, Oliver Dowden's master plan involved a slow migration from outdoor and online performance to indoor performances in empty auditoria and finally to limited audience participation. And frankly, it seemed more of a statement of the bleeding audience as long as social distancing is still in force. I need hardly add, of course, that there was absolutely no financial underpinning mentioned, which is strange considering the billions that countries like Germany have found for the arts. We can only hope that a future with an effective and widely available vaccine will render Mr. Dowden's master plan obsolete. There have, of course, been other efforts made in Scotland to mitigate the immediate pain, and some new COVID-related grants. The promise from Creative Scotland that all cancelled performances and shows will still be subject to the agreed funding, and their deadlines, including touring bids, will be extended. And it's all welcome and it's all worthwhile, but until this weekend, at least, it all seemed a bit like putting sticking plaster on an axe wound. Despite this new funding, when and if recovery will come can only be a matter for agonised speculation. More connected souls than me are trying to wrestle with this conundrum, and they're trying to visualise tomorrow's world with the kind of experience and the kind of knowledge that I certainly don't possess. So for the next part of my contribution, I want to leap ahead a generation. I want to envisage how we might reconfigure education to underpin and prepare for a different set of cultural expectations. When I was part of that in-service training programme for reluctant bureaucrats known as the Board of Creative Scotland, there were, despite all the controversies, some very inventive programmes set up to make creativity an integral part of education rather than an occasional bolt-on. For a few years there, I chaired a creative learning group, and it opened my eyes to a whole raft of initiatives in every local authority area where creativity was encouraged and nurtured from nursery right through college and higher education. But I discovered as well that somewhere along the line, too many people had mislaid that essential and passionate belief that without creativity being absolutely embedded in both teaching and learning, right across the curriculum too, we risk stifling and limiting the imaginations, not just of tomorrow's artists, but of their audiences as well. One of my favourite quotes about education comes from that educational guru, Kenneth Robinson. He notes that creativity is not some kind of esoteric gift, it's only bestowed on special people. If you're human, he says, it comes with the kit. And of course it does. He likes to tell a story of a little girl who was drawing, and her teacher asked her, "What are you drawing?" And she says, "I'm drawing God." And the teacher says, "But we don't know what God looks like." And she says, "You will in a minute." And it's that fearlessness, it's that unself-conscious confidence that nothing is off limits, which tomorrow's practitioners and those who benefit from their output will need in this changed world of ours. Because I worry that we failed to deliver what was a boldly stated curriculum for excellence, one which envisaged an end to those self-limiting silos and encouraged fresh air, both literally and academically, blown through the system. It did the curriculum of excellence, it talked of values, the values of collaborative teamwork, working, the kind of ideas brokerage which underpins some of the most successful technological advances of our age. We need to revisit and we need to embed these worthy ambitions for the sake of the cultural landscape we want our children to both enjoy and indeed to create. Now, I remember listening to someone talking about how the ring cycle was used for multidisciplinary lessons. And I know it sounds esoteric, but broken down, it offered scope for lessons in history, geography, geopolitics, musicology, design, linguistics, relationships, and lots more. And I remember a schools project set up too by the film industry, which involved children in every aspect of the world, the world needed for cinematic success. Not just children as actors, but as set designers, builders and painters, wardrobe personnel, makeup artists, sound engineers and scriptwriters. And thinking about that clever way of including all manner of different skill sets made me remember just how many ancillary jobs are dependent on all of our creative endeavours. If we lose theatre, we lose the people who make the magic work backstage in front of house as well. We lose the income they generate for all the adjacent hospitality industries. If we lose live music events, we lose the thousands of people needed to set up and run them, as a raft of major artists have just publicly underlined. If we lose filmmaking, we lose all the ancillary jobs there too, not just during the actual process, but pre and post-production work and the computer generating industries who also pour their imagination into those hugely successful gaming industries where Scotland is a world leader. Well, I want, ladies and gentlemen, I want all Scotland's children to have the opportunities the previous generation had, my generation had, but also the access to the fast-moving technological advances which we're going to need to build tomorrow's world. I know it's not easy to be an optimist just now, and it would be very stupid of me to try and pretend COVID-19 will not occasion casualties not directly concerned with health. But what it is possible to do, I think, is possible to sustain a belief that we've got sufficient reservoirs here of Indigenous talent, of imagination, innovation, and sheer bloody-mindedness to fashion a future where all our hard-won cultural strengths might find new ways to survive and to thrive.